Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, you're holding up well for a very, 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 very long day.
Thank you, Representative.
I want to hit on, so you do agree that we spend less money on education today than we did in 2008, 2009?
So that's one of those questions that, regardless how you answer, so I do agree that the amount of education funding that can be specifically used for educational programs that works into the classroom is less now than it was in 2008, 2009.
Does that include salaries?
Teacher salary or salary and benefits?
Including pensions?
Including pensions. So
Everything.
if you add the full package,
Okay.
so if we back out pensions, where there's less money going in the classrooms, and I think the
How do you
argument-
back out pensions?
Excuse me?
How do you back out pensions from education funding? It's if you include salaries, health care, pensions is part of it. I mean, as a superintendent, would you go to your teachers and say, you know what, pensions are out the window, we can't afford it anymore, so no more pensions, but we're still going to pay salary and all your other benefits?
So as a superintendent, unfortunately, what I had to say, although there was an increase approved by then the governor and General Assembly, my legacy cost, my structural cost are still forcing the district to make reductions and increase taxes.
But pensions are part of
Pensions were part of it.
So, chart here, we have 2008, 2009 funding, $9.6 billion all in, pensions, salaries, everything. Today we're at $10.6 billion. The only reduction in overall education funding I see came in 9-10 and 10-11 when stimulus money was supplanted, state education dollars were cut, stimulus money was applied on top, and then obviously the cliff fell out, and then you're down to $9.3 billion, and steadily it rose. A lot of this is pension costs, huge cost driver, still today, huge cost driver for the Commonwealth and school districts, and it's $1 billion right there,
Yeah.
2008, 2009. So, I mean, I just think it's dishonest to not include pensions. It's a part of that benefits package, and believe me, if we tried to take away pensions, I think there would be a lawsuit within 5 seconds of that happening. I think you would agree with that, right? Maybe by legislators themselves. If what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Let's hit on the framework budget. That is the compromise budget the governor's talking about currently, correct?
Yes.
So the supplemental that the governor's asking is the same as the framework.
The framework, I just want to make sure we're both looking at the same thing. The framework that the governor recommended for basic education funding in 15-16 was $377 million. The compromised framework, what he shared, is $377 million of basic education funding. 16-17, we're asking for $200 million of basic education funding.
So he's building the budget he says he wants to build upon for 15-16. Is that the framework budget, the bipartisan agreement that transpired roughly around November, the framework budget?
The number that we're using and building upon for the 16-17 year for basic education is $377 million.
So it's not the framework budget.
So you'd have to share with me what the number in the framework budget and what you're referring to the framework budget is.
So the framework budget total spend for education line items on the tracking run is $11.34 billion. The 15-16 enacted budget with the governor's proposed supplementals is $11.59 billion. So are we still talking framework, or are we talking now a new compromise budget?
To be fair and respectful of your time, I'll share the specifics around the budget numbers that we prepared our budget and our ask for.
Okay.
I'm not as comfortable just kind of sharing the narrative around it. I want to make sure we're both speaking the same language.
Well, I mean, I asked our Appropriations Committee to compare the actual framework tracking run versus the enacted budget with the governor's proposed supplementals, and they don't match up. Some do, but overall, the governor's asking for the 15-16 year $50 million more than the framework budget, which he's not asking for anymore. Because if you read his speech, he's building on quote unquote the compromise budget. Now, the compromise budget to me was a framework budget, correct?
So what we've identified as the basic education funding for 16-17, the governor's budget proposal includes $6.3 billion for fiscal year 16-17, which in BEF is a $200 million increase over the proposed.
Go back to 15-16?
15-16.
15-16.
So then in 15-16, a supplemental appropriation of $3.3 billion for fiscal year 15-16 would provide a total of $6.1 billion. So we're asking for a $377 million increase in 15-16 distributed.
That's because your 15-16, you pull out pension funds, correct? You move pension funds to a restricted account for 15-16?
Yes, the funding that I've been sharing and discussing in relation to the Department of Education increase does not include pension.
Okay, and then you're asking for, between the framework budget and the enacted, you're asking for the elimination of job training and education programs, $850 million cut to Community College Capital Fund, $216 million cut to community education councils, elimination of higher education assistance, and then elimination of lifelong learning. Now, all those line items, I don't know what higher ed assistance or lifelong learning are, but they were provided in the framework budget. Do you know what they were at all?
No, I can forward that to you.
Okay, I have no idea. And then the framework budget eliminates the Ready to Learn block grant and puts in the basic education funding, correct?
Yes.
So, I mean, we're really comparing apples to oranges between the framework, the bipartisan budget everybody talks about, and what the governor's now asking in supplementals. So really, there's no more framework budget because they don't match at all. At all. All right. Let's talk about, yesterday the governor issued an executive order mandating minimum wage. Have you notified school districts about their implication on that?
We are actually now running an analysis as to how the executive order will impact school districts, and will, if it does accordingly.
Okay, because I'm very worried about the language of this executive order, particularly under coverage, B1, which basically says any employee under the Minimum Wage Act who directly performs services or construction will have that 1015 mandate effective July 1st, 2016. A great example is cafeteria workers for school districts. They perform a service, they directly perform a service, they're under the Minimum Wage Act. Depending on the school district, I don't know what their salary is, but they're going to be affected by that. So I would urge you to look, and the governor's language yesterday was this should not affect anybody outside the state employees or contractors, but the way the language actually reads, it is very open-ended and does not have any real qualifier to knock that back to directly. So I would caution you on that, and make sure that school districts don't see huge cost increase because of that moving forward. Let's talk about Plan Con funding. Framework budget. What was the funding level? Zero, correct?
For 15-16, yes.
The budget that passed, that the governor vetoed December 29th, funding level was zero, correct?
15-16 ask is zero. Yes.
Yeah, it's been zero for a while,
Just make sure
right?
we're speaking the same language as we
Yeah,
before.
it's been zero for a while, right? Going back to the June 30th budget that was fully vetoed to December 29th, that line item has been zeroed. Why has that line item been zero?
Going to open up to my Plan Con tab here right now. And while I'm pulling up that page, but we do have an appropriation for Plan Con this year. So there is we are making a recommendation to include Plan Con reimbursement for the 16-17 budget.
So why was it at zero? Wasn't there an agreement on a bonding plan moving forward to reimburse all school districts and catch them up?
When the governor and I last spoke about the bond, it was the financial conditions at the time did not lend themselves or support the cost of trying to secure a bond.
What's our bond rating right now?
We just had another bond. Let me ask real quick. Bond rating is, I don't have Barbara here with me, do I? Well, I'll get back to you on that one.
Okay. Do we have junk bonds? Do we currently have junk bonds? We're not that level, right?
We're not at that level now.
So we still have aptitude to actually bond that. Do you know who does have junk bonds? A lot of school districts, because they're not getting money. They have junk bonds. That brings me into a question. Will the Governor Wolf submit a payment request to Treasury to ensure school districts won't close as he did with corrections?
So we've not yet made the request to the governor, so I can't speak on the governor's behalf, but we've not yet been at a point where we have to make that request.
At what point are you going to ensure that school districts will not close because of that veto?
Yeah, we continue to monitor and work with school districts to identify expense and compare it to revenue. So we'll continue to monitor and work with them closely.
How far will you take it? Will the governor allow school districts to close before he submits a payment?
Yeah, I can't answer a question that we've not, orders we've not yet embarked.
Your Act 147 waivers, some of those requests obviously are hangovers between the two fiscal years, contracts, grant payments. It's a lot. You did apply for a lot of waivers moving forward, some federal, some state dollars. I want to highlight one in particular. It was for the textbook materials and equipment for non-public schools. It's about $1.3 million. Now, that line item helps school districts, non-public schools, buy textbooks and materials. Obviously, without a budget, those school districts weren't getting any dollars. Was there any conversation about using those lapse funding to try to get a down payment so those school districts could get them? Was there any conversation about going to those book dealers and saying, listen, we're sitting on some cash, let's get it out to you so you can have books?
No, we have not had that conversation with book dealers for release, no.
Some of that money was spent. I have a Pen Watch update, and about $135,000 of that was spent. Again, it looks like some contractual stuff. Most of those were executed in July, right about when you probably had contracts moving forward. So there was, $1.1 million left. Is that money still sitting and available for use?
I know we were working with our non-pubs and some of our other partners at that time when funding was released. I will double check and verify what's left in that account and share with you, if anything, what has been allocated and what is left, if anything. So
Okay.
we'll definitely forward that information to the chairman.
Also with Pen Watch, I noticed some furniture purchases in July from State Library, a couple other PA assessments. I don't know how to put this. I mean, we're in the middle of an impasse. School districts are getting $0, and the administration is using lapse fundings for furniture purchases. School districts were not happy when they saw that on Pen Watch. It didn't look good. They weren't happy about it. I mean, put yourself back in your superintendent's shoes, and you saw that pop up on Pen Watch, all this money being spent by departments when you're getting absolutely zero. I would really caution the administration in general, and I know the budget secretary approves these, and I will bring it up with him on Thursday, but there were a lot of spending that should not have happened, particularly that could have been delayed until a later date. That money was going to be there regardless. That should not have been spent on furniture during a general budget overpass. And I appreciate your time, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.